Abby had always felt at home in the quiet, wild expanse of the valley. The wind and the mountains whispered stories to her, and she had learned to listen. Her boots, worn but sturdy, had walked countless miles across the rough terrain. She was a cowgirl, but to the people who knew her, she was more than just that. She was a force of nature, strong, independent, and always prepared for whatever the world threw at her. On this particular evening, as the sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks, Abby stood at the edge of her barn, wiping the sweat from her brow. The day had been long, tending to the cattle, fixing the broken fence, and making sure everything on the ranch was in order. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it kept her busy. The solitude was something she had learned to cherish. The valley had always felt like her sanctuary, a place where she could escape from the world's distractions and find peace in the rhythm of daily life. But tonight, something was different. The weather had taken a strange turn. Abby could feel it in the air, the heavy weight of the clouds pressing down as if the sky was about to burst. She glanced up, frowning. The wind had picked up, sweeping across the valley in gusts that rattled the barn doors. A chill crept into the air, biting at her exposed skin. The temperature was dropping faster than usual, and Abby knew that this wasn't just another cold front moving through. This was something more. The sky darkened quickly, and within minutes the snow began to fall. It started as light flakes, gentle and swirling in the evening breeze. But soon the storm grew more intense. The wind howled, pushing the snow sideways, blurring the landscape in a thick white fog. Abby narrowed her eyes, trying to make out the distant hills, but they were lost in the storm. Her gut told her this was no ordinary storm. This wasn't just a winter squall. This was something fierce, something dangerous. And with every passing second, she could feel the weight of it in the air. It wasn't just a snowstorm. It was a warning. She turned quickly and hurried back into the barn where her horse, Dusty, stood patiently in his stall, already saddled and ready to go. Abby had been planning to take him out for a ride before dark, but now she wasn't so sure. The storm was picking up fast, and the visibility was quickly fading. Still, she didn't hesitate. There was no time to waste. She grabbed her coat from the hook, pulled on her gloves, and secured her hat tightly on her head. She didn't like the idea of riding in such a dangerous storm, but she knew she had to check on the cattle. If the storm got worse, they would need shelter, and she couldn't afford to wait until it was too late. Dusty whinnied softly as Abby approached, his dark eyes reflecting the worry she felt deep inside. She patted his neck, whispering softly to him, "Let's make this quick, boy. We need to get the herd into the barn before this storm gets any worse." She led Dusty out of the barn, and as soon as they stepped outside, the full force of the storm hit her. The wind howled so loudly it almost drowned out the sound of Dusty's hooves crunching through the snow. The cold bit at her face, and she pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, squinting into the swirling white chaos. Snowflakes stung her skin like tiny needles, and the world around her seemed to vanish into the storm. Abby didn't hesitate. She urged Dusty forward, guiding him toward the pasture where the cattle were grazing. The wind made it nearly impossible to see, but she knew the path well enough to trust her instincts. The cattle needed to be brought inside before the storm buried them in the snow. She could hear the faint sounds of the herd in the distance, their low bellowing rising above the roar of the wind. As they rode, Abby's thoughts raced. The storm was moving in fast, much faster than she had anticipated. The snow was thickening by the minute, and soon even the familiar landmarks of the valley would be hidden. She had no idea how long the storm would last or how bad it would get. The worst part was the uncertainty. She could handle the cold, handle the snow, but she couldn't handle the unknown. Suddenly, through the haze of snow, Abby heard something that made her stop in her tracks. It was a faint, frantic noise, barely audible over the wind. Abby frowned, her heart skipping a beat. It sounded like a horse. She listened harder, her breath forming visible clouds in the freezing air. There it was again, a desperate, frightened sound followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves stumbling through the snow. Abby's stomach tightened. No one should be out here in this weather, not unless they were in serious trouble. And if there was a horse out there, alone in this storm, it was in trouble. Without thinking, Abby spurred Dusty into a gallop. The storm was only getting worse, but she couldn't ignore the sound of that horse. It was too far to be heard clearly, but she was sure of what she had heard. Someone, or something, was in need of help. Dusty's hooves pounded the snow as they raced across the field, the wind pushing them sideways. Abby leaned forward, urging him to go faster. She wasn't sure if the storm was getting worse, or if it was just the adrenaline in her veins making it feel that way. The snow was blinding, and the visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Minutes passed, and the faint sounds of the horse grew louder. Abby's heart raced in her chest as she strained her eyes, trying to find the source of the noise. She could feel the urgency in her bones, the knowledge that every second counted. Time was running out for the horse, and every minute she spent searching in this storm made it less likely that she would find it. And then, just as Abby was about to give up hope, she saw it. In the distance, barely visible through the snow, was a dark shape lying motionless on the ground. Abby's breath caught in her throat. The horse. Without hesitation, she pulled Dusty to a halt and leapt from his back. She dashed toward the animal, her heart pounding. The storm raged around her, but she couldn't focus on anything except the frozen figure in front of her. As she neared it, she could see the horse more clearly. It was lying on its side, its legs stiff with cold. Snow had piled up around it, covering most of its body. But its head was still visible, its eyes wide with fear. Abby's heart sank. She knelt beside the horse, her hands shaking as she gently touched its side. The animal's coat was ice cold, and its breath came in shallow, labored gasps. It had been out here for far too long. Abby didn't know who the horse belonged to, but it didn't matter. She had to help it. There was no time to waste. With a steady hand, she gently worked to dig the horse out of the snow, her mind racing. The storm had already taken so much from this animal, but Abby wasn't about to let it take its life. Not if she could help it. The cold stung her hands, but she didn't stop. There was no time for hesitation, no time to worry about the freezing wind or the thick, choking snow. She was focused entirely on the horse. Every muscle in her body ached from the cold and the effort, but she didn't give up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she managed to free the horse from the snow. She could feel its frailty beneath her hands, but there was still life in it, just barely. Abby's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to think of what to do next. She needed to get the horse somewhere warm, somewhere safe. But there was no time to waste. She had to act quickly or they would both be lost to the storm. Abby could feel the weight of the horse in her arms as she tried to lift it, but it was clear that the animal was far too weak to stand on its own. The snow had hardened around it, and the temperature was so low that even Abby's hands felt numb from the cold. The wind howled louder now, cutting through her coat and biting at her skin, but she didn't care. There was no time to waste. The storm was growing more violent with every passing minute, and the longer she stood there, the more likely it was that both she and the horse would be swallowed up by the snow. She needed help. But in this storm, help was nowhere to be found. Abby knew that she was on her own. "Come on," she whispered to the horse, trying to reassure it, even as her own body trembled from the cold. She could see its labored breaths, each one shallow and desperate. The horse was still alive, but it was weakening quickly. Abby looked around, her mind racing for a plan. The barn was too far away. There was no way she could drag the horse all the way back through the snowstorm. She needed to get it somewhere closer, somewhere sheltered where it could get warm, and fast. Her eyes darted around in the swirling white world, and then they landed on a small grove of trees not far off. The trees were thick with snow, and the ground beneath them would be softer than the frozen field she stood on. It wasn't perfect, but it was her best shot. "All right, you're coming with me," Abby said, her voice firm as she slowly stood up, the horse's limp body still in her arms. She gently lifted the animal, doing her best not to strain it further. "Just hang on." With determination, she began to walk, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wind fought against her, pushing her back, but she refused to give up. She had to keep moving. There was no other choice. Abby gritted her teeth, focusing all her energy on moving forward. She could feel the cold seeping deeper into her bones, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to finding shelter. The trees were just ahead, their branches heavy with snow, offering some kind of shield from the wind. She could only hope that the horse would last long enough for her to get it there. As she reached the grove, Abby lowered the horse onto the soft snow beneath the trees. It was a small relief to be out of the full force of the wind, but she knew that she wasn't out of danger yet. The horse was still unresponsive, its body stiff from the cold, but Abby's hope wasn't gone. She had to keep trying. She could still save it. She quickly unbuckled the rope from around the horse's body and removed the blankets from her saddlebag. She spread the blankets on the snow, forming a makeshift bed for the horse. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. She placed the horse gently on the blankets and then began rubbing its sides, trying to bring some warmth back to its body. The storm raged on around them, but Abby didn't notice. She was focused on the task at hand. Her hands were still shaking from the cold, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed to be calm. The horse needed her to be calm. Come on, she murmured again, her voice quieter this time as she gently rubbed its chest. The horse's eyes flickered, but it didn't move. Abby's heart sank. She couldn't give up. Not yet. She knew what she had to do. She had done it before with other animals. She had saved cattle in similar conditions. She just needed to act quickly, and this horse might have a chance. Abby took a deep breath and leaned down to the horse's ear. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, her words barely audible against the roar of the storm. "We're getting through this. I'm not giving up on you." Abby pulled herself to her feet and ran back to Dusty, who was standing quietly by the grove. His mane was tangled from the wind, and his ears were perked up in alertness. Abby grabbed the rope from his saddle and tied it securely around the horse's body. She needed to get it moving again, even if it was just a little. She tugged gently at the rope, trying to encourage the animal to stand. The horse let out a small whinny, but it still didn't rise. Abby's frustration began to grow, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to let the fear take over. She had to stay focused. She took another deep breath and looked around. The barn was still too far to reach in the storm. But maybe, just maybe, she could get the horse to stand long enough to walk back to the barn with her. She had to try. Her heart pounded in her chest as she went to work, rubbing the horse's legs, trying to get some circulation back into its frozen muscles. Every motion felt like it took all of her energy, but she didn't stop. The horse had to survive. She would not let it die in the snow. For what felt like an eternity, Abby worked tirelessly, her hands numb, her body aching. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the snow continued to pile up around them. But Abby didn't care. She kept her focus on the task at hand, her voice soft but firm as she urged the horse to rise, and then, finally, a miracle. The horse's legs shifted slightly and it let out a soft groan. Abby's breath caught in her throat as she saw the animal's body twitch. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The horse was still alive and it was trying. "Come on, just a little more," Abby said as she gently but firmly helped the horse lift its head. With a groan and a shake of its body, the horse began to rise. Abby's heart soared as the horse slowly got to its feet. It was shaky and its legs wobbled beneath it, but it was standing. Abby quickly wrapped the rope around the horse's body again, trying to stabilize it. She knew it wasn't completely out of danger, but this was a sign. The animal had the strength to survive. She led the horse carefully back toward Dusty, keeping a steady pace as she moved through the snow. It was a slow process and the storm still raged around them, but Abby could see the faintest glimmer of hope. She wasn't going to let this horse die out here, not if she could help it. Every step felt like a victory. As she made her way back, Abby's mind raced, calculating her next steps. She needed to get the horse to the barn as quickly as possible, where it could get the warmth it needed. She couldn't take any chances. The horse had come this far. It was up to Abby now to make sure it survived. Abby's hands were sore, her fingers stiff with the cold, but she didn't let that slow her down. The storm had not let up, and it felt as though the very sky was pressing down on her shoulders. The snow had already piled up to her ankles, and it was difficult to tell where the land ended and the storm began. The wind continued to howl, sending icy gusts in all directions, but Abby kept her eyes focused ahead on the barn that was just within reach. She had never felt more determined in her life. Every step she took with the horse was a victory. The animal was still weak, its legs shaking beneath it, but Abby could see it trying to keep up. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had done everything she could to save it, and now it was alive. It was moving. That in itself felt like a miracle. As Abby led the horse through the snow, she could hear its shallow breaths, still ragged but steadier than before. The horse was clearly exhausted, but it was making progress. Dusty followed close behind, his hooves crunching in the snow as he stayed close to Abby and the animal. They reached the edge of the barn, and Abby's heart lifted. She had never been so relieved to see its wooden walls standing firm in the storm. She quickly ushered the horse into the shelter of the barn, closing the door behind them to keep out the wind. Inside, it was a little warmer, although still far from comfortable. But it was shelter. It was a place to keep the horse safe. Abby immediately set to work, guiding the horse into a stall and setting up some hay for it to lie on. She wasn't sure how long it would take for the horse to recover fully, but she knew she had to act fast. The cold was still creeping in, and the longer the horse remained out of warmth, the worse its chances became. She grabbed blankets from the corner of the barn, carefully draping them over the horse's body. The animal shifted slightly, letting out a soft snort as it lay down on the hay. Abby worked quickly, rubbing the horse's body, trying to stimulate some warmth back into its muscles. She knew it was still in danger. Frostbite, shock, and exhaustion were all very real threats, but she refused to give up now. The barn was quiet except for the storm raging outside and the occasional sound of the horse's breath. Abby's thoughts raced as she worked. She didn't know who the horse belonged to. She had never seen it before, but it didn't matter. In this moment, it wasn't about ownership. It was about survival. This horse had been left in the storm, and Abby wasn't going to let it die alone in the snow. Minutes passed like hours, and Abby worked relentlessly to keep the horse comfortable. She brushed its coat, carefully checking for any signs of frostbite, and wrapped it up in every blanket she could find. The storm outside howled louder, as if trying to drown out the quiet determination of the barn's occupants. The horse's condition remained uncertain, but Abby refused to let fear cloud her focus. She knew that all she could do now was keep the animal warm and hope for the best. She didn't know how long she had been working, but when she finally took a step back to check on the horse, something incredible happened. The animal's eyes flickered. For the first time since Abby had found it in the snow, it moved its head slightly. Abby's heart skipped a beat as she watched the horse lift its head a little higher. Its breath seemed more regular now, and there was a faint glimmer of life returning to its dark eyes. Abby's chest tightened with emotion. The sight of the horse trying to lift its head was more than just a sign of recovery. It was a sign that the storm hadn't won. It hadn't taken everything from her, and it hadn't taken this horse either. Abby took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over her. She knew the road ahead wasn't over, but this was progress. This was hope. She gently placed a hand on the horse's neck, speaking softly to it. "You're doing great," she whispered. "We're going to get through this together." Abby stood there for a moment, allowing the warmth from the barn to surround her. The storm outside was still fierce, but it was as if a small piece of the world had calmed in this moment. The horse was no longer frozen in the snow. It was alive. And for that, Abby was deeply grateful. She left the horse in its stall for a moment, stepping outside to check on Dusty. Her faithful horse was standing quietly at the edge of the barn, waiting for her to return. Abby gave him a pat on the neck, knowing that he had been with her through it all. He had been the steady force that kept them moving forward. Even when the storm seemed too much to handle, she couldn't have done it without him. As she walked back inside, she checked on the horse again. It was still lying on the hay, its body a little warmer now, its breathing steadier. Abby smiled faintly. The worst was over. The horse was going to make it. But Abby knew she couldn't relax just yet. She had to stay vigilant. She had to make sure the horse remained comfortable and kept its strength. She wasn't about to let her guard down now. The storm was still raging outside and the night was far from over. She needed to be there for the horse no matter what. Abby spent the rest of the evening checking on the horse, ensuring it had enough water and food. She had built a small fire in the corner of the barn to warm the space further, and she kept a careful eye on the animal. The horse's condition was improving, but slowly. Abby didn't mind the pace. She knew that miracles didn't always happen overnight. Sometimes they took time. The night dragged on, and Abby fought off the fatigue that was slowly creeping into her bones. She hadn't slept, and she wasn't sure if she would. But the horse was making progress, and that was enough to keep her going. As the hours passed, Abby began to hear more of the storm outside. It had reached its peak, the wind howling through the trees, the snow piling up at the barn's entrance. But inside the barn, it felt like a small safe haven, a place where the storm couldn't touch them. Abby glanced over at the horse, who was now resting more peacefully, its body showing signs of recovery. A part of her had feared the worst, but now she allowed herself to hope. She sat down on the floor next to the horse's stall, leaning against the wall. Her eyes grew heavy, but she stayed alert, listening to the storm and the rhythmic sound of the horse's breathing. She had done everything she could for this animal, and she was proud of that. Abby closed her eyes for a moment, the weariness of the day catching up to her. But just as her mind began to drift off, she heard a soft sound, a soft nicker from the horse. Abby's eyes snapped open, her heart leaping in her chest. The horse was awake again. The morning light filtered weakly through the barn's small windows, casting soft, pale beams on the snow outside. The storm had not fully passed, but it had calmed considerably. The fierce winds had died down, and the snow was now falling gently, covering the valley in a blanket of white. Abby stretched, her body stiff from hours of tending to the horse through the night. The exhaustion from the long hours of care weighed heavily on her. But there was something else now, too. A sense of relief, even hope. The horse in the stall was still sleeping, but Abby could see the slow rise and fall of its chest. It had been a long, hard night, and Abby couldn't have asked for a better sign of improvement. The animal was alive, breathing steadily, and there was a softness to its eyes that hadn't been there the night before. It wasn't fully recovered, but it was getting there, and for Abby that was all that mattered. She took a deep breath, smiling faintly as she rubbed her tired eyes. The night's work had been draining, but she was proud of what she had done. She had saved this horse from certain death in the storm, and in doing so had proven to herself once again what she was capable of. But she wasn't done yet. She knew the horse needed more rest and care, and Abby wasn't the kind to rest on her laurels. As Abby began preparing a fresh batch of hay for the horse, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She straightened up, brushing the straw from her hands and glancing toward the door. She wasn't expecting any visitors, especially not in the middle of the storm, but the unmistakable sound of boots crunching in the snow was getting closer. The barn door creaked open, and in walked Charlie, the neighbor whose horse Abby had saved the night before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered from years of working on the ranch. His usual cowboy hat sat low over his eyes, but Abby could tell from his posture that he was both worried and grateful. "Abby?" Charlie called out, his voice low and gruff. "You in here?" Abby stepped forward from the stall, wiping her hands on her pants. "Right here, Charlie. What brings you out in this storm?" Charlie's gaze shifted to the stall where the horse lay resting. He sighed, his eyes softening as he walked over to the animal. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, his voice filled with awe. "I can't believe you saved her." Abby smiled tiredly, her heart swelling with quiet pride. "She's a tough one. Had to fight to get her back to life, but I think she's gonna make it." Charlie knelt beside the horse, gently stroking its coat. Abby could see the deep gratitude in his eyes, but also something else, an overwhelming sense of relief. "I thought I'd lost her for good," he said quietly. "She's one of my best horses. Thank you, Abby. I can't even begin to express how much this means to me." Abby shrugged, trying to downplay the significance of what she'd done. "It's nothing. Just glad I could help. She was in bad shape, but we're past the worst of it now." Charlie stood up, shaking his head. "It's not nothing. You saved my horse. My livelihood, really. And you did it on your own out here in the middle of that storm." He paused, his expression serious. "That's not something I can just forget." Abby met his gaze, her smile fading a little as she realized just how much this moment meant to him. Charlie was a proud man, someone who valued his animals above all else. Losing one of them, especially in a storm like this, would have been devastating. But here it was, the miracle that Abby had worked hard for. Charlie turned to her then, his face softening even more. "I want to repay you, Abby. I know you're not one to take charity, but you've done something incredible here. Whatever you need, you just let me know." Abby blinked in surprise. She wasn't used to people offering her anything. She had spent most of her life doing everything on her own, without expecting help from anyone. But there was something about Charlie's sincerity that made her pause. She wasn't sure what to say, so instead she just nodded, accepting his gratitude without words. "You don't have to repay me," she finally said, her voice quiet. "I did what needed to be done." Charlie looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, if you change your mind, I'm here. You've earned something more than a simple thank you." Just as Abby was about to respond, she heard the sound of hooves approaching from outside the barn. The faint sound of a wagon pulling through the snow grew louder, until a cart pulled up in front of the barn. Abby frowned, wondering who else could be out here, especially in such bad weather. The wagon door opened, and out stepped Mayor Thomas, a familiar face from town, along with several other people from the valley. "Abby, Charlie," Mayor Thomas called out, waving as he walked toward them. "We heard about what happened last night. You've done something amazing, Abby." Abby blinked, taken aback by the sudden arrival. I don't know what you mean." Thomas gave her a warm smile as he stepped closer. Word got out about how you saved that horse last night. You're the talk of the valley right now." Abby felt her face flush with embarrassment. It wasn't a big deal. Just did what anyone would have done. Thomas shook his head. No, you're selling yourself short. We all know how dangerous that storm was. For you to go out there and risk your life for a horse, it's more than anyone else would have done. You saved a life, Abby, and that deserves recognition. Abby's eyes darted to Charlie, who stood silently next to her, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't seem surprised by the attention, as if he had been expecting this. "The mayor's right," Charlie spoke up, his voice firm. "She's not just some rancher, folks. Abby's a hero in this valley." Abby's mind was spinning. She had never thought of herself as a hero. In fact, the idea seemed ridiculous to her. She had just done what felt right. But hearing it from others, seeing the gratefulness in their eyes, it made her wonder if maybe she had done something worth more than she had given herself credit for. Mayor Thomas looked at Abby, his expression serious. "We've decided to create a new community fund for ranchers and farmers in the valley," he explained. "Something to help everyone prepare for storms like the one we just had. And we'd like you to be part of it. You're a leader now, Abby, and we want you to help guide the way." Abby stared at him stunned. She had never been one to lead anyone, never been interested in organizing anything. But seeing the respect in the mayor's eyes, the appreciation from the others around her, made her hesitate. Maybe it was time to step up. Charlie gave her an encouraging look. "You've already started leading, Abby. You just didn't know it." The mayor handed Abby a small envelope. "This is a small token of our appreciation from everyone in the valley," he said. Abby took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Inside there was money, a sum that far exceeded anything she'd ever received in one sitting. But more than the money, what struck her was the gesture. The people in the valley, people she had always seen as strangers or distant neighbors, were recognizing her. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I didn't do this for the money. I did it because it was the right thing to do," Mayor Thomas smiled. "And that's why you're the one who should be leading this valley. You didn't ask for thanks, but you deserve it more than anyone." The days that followed were a whirlwind for Abby. What had started as a quiet, solitary life on the ranch had suddenly become a center of attention in the valley. Word had spread far and wide about the cowgirl who had braved the worst storm in years to save a horse. People from all corners of the valley came to visit her, offering their thanks and admiration. Some brought food, others brought tools or supplies, but most came with a simple smile and a heartfelt "thank you." Abby wasn't used to being the center of attention. In fact, she had always kept to herself, preferring the company of animals to people. But as the days passed, something started to change inside her. She realized that her actions, though small in her eyes, had meant something more to the people around her. She had given them hope when they were caught in the fear of a raging storm, and now they were looking to her for guidance. It wasn't just the money or the community fund that had changed things. It was the sense of unity that had emerged from the chaos. The valley, once divided by old rivalries and grudges, had come together. They had seen firsthand the strength that one person could bring, and in doing so, they had begun to believe that they, too, could face the challenges of life with a little more courage and a little more heart. Abby stood outside the barn one afternoon, staring out over the valley. The snow was gone now, leaving behind fields of fresh green grass. The weather had warmed, and spring was slowly making its way into the valley, but Abby still felt the weight of the past few days. There was so much she hadn't expected, so much she hadn't planned for. But as she looked over the land she loved, she realized something. She was stronger than she had ever known. "Everything okay?" Charlie's voice broke through her thoughts. He had ridden over to check on her, as he had most days since the storm. The horse she had saved, now named Storm, had made a full recovery, and Charlie had been by her side often, offering help and support. Abby nodded without turning to face him. "Yeah. Just thinking about everything that's happened." Charlie leaned against the fence, his gaze following hers as they both watched the quiet beauty of the valley. "You've changed things around here, you know that?" Abby finally turned to look at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I didn't do anything special, I just saved a horse." Charlie chuckled softly. "That's the thing. To you, it was just the right thing to do. But to everyone else, it was a sign that the valley can be more than it was. You brought people together, Abby. You don't see it, but that's what you did. Abby swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. She hadn't realized how much her simple act of kindness had meant to those around her. She had thought it was just about saving the horse, but it had been about something much bigger. It had been about hope, unity, and the kind of strength that only a community could share. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing a little. I never thought of it like that. Charlie smiled. Most people don't. You did what needed to be done, without thinking about the consequences. That's what makes you a leader. Abby shook her head. I don't know if I'm a leader. I've always been happy working alone. I know, Charlie said, his voice thoughtful. But sometimes when life gives us a chance to step up, we take it, whether we want to or not. Abby let his words sit with her for a moment. She had always been the quiet one, content with her own company and the animals she cared for. But now she realized that the valley needed something more than just a quiet rancher. It needed someone who could bring them together when times were tough, someone who could remind them that they weren't alone. Maybe she was that person after all. I think you're right, she said finally, turning back to look at the valley. I've always loved this place, but I never thought I could be part of something bigger. You already are, Charlie replied softly. You're more a part of it than you realize. Abby smiled at that, her heart swelling with pride and a quiet understanding. She had spent so much time feeling like an outsider, thinking she wasn't meant to be anything more than just a rancher. But now she saw that she had the power to make a difference, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. The days turned into weeks, and the valley continued to change. People came together more often, organizing meetings to discuss the new community fund that Abby had inspired. They worked together to prepare for the next storm, making sure that they had the supplies they needed and that the farms and ranches were all ready for whatever nature threw their way. Abby had started meeting with the townspeople, listening to their ideas, offering her own thoughts. She was no longer the quiet, solitary cowgirl in the back of the barn. She was part of the heartbeat of the valley, a voice of reason and strength. One evening, as Abby walked home after a meeting with the mayor, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The valley had changed, but so had she. She had stepped up in a way she never thought possible, and in doing so, she had found a new sense of purpose. When she arrived at her ranch, she found Storm waiting for her in the stable, its dark eyes glowing in the soft light of the lanterns. The horse had become a symbol of hope for her, but it was more than that. It was a reminder of everything she had accomplished and everything she could still do. Abby walked over to the horse, reaching out to pat its neck. We did it, didn't we? She whispered. The horse snorted softly as if agreeing with her. She smiled, feeling a bond with the animal that ran deeper than just the storm they had weathered together. It was a connection that felt like home. As she stood there in the quiet of the barn, Abby realized that the valley was no longer a place of isolation for her. It was a place of community, of people coming together for a common purpose. And she, in her own quiet way, had become the thread that held it all together. The future felt uncertain, as it always did, but for the first time in a long time, Abby wasn't afraid. She knew that she had a place here, a place in the valley and in the hearts of those who had come to depend on her. And as she looked out over the land, the sun beginning to set behind the mountains, Abby knew that this was just the beginning. The storm had come and gone, but what remained was something far stronger. It was the unity of a community, the courage of a woman, and the quiet strength of a place that would always be home.